Welcome everyone to your virtual home base days at Dunrovin and the Awesome Osprey Project Classroom. This is Michael Academia, your lead researcher, and it's official now. Humboldt State University had our graduation this past Saturday, and I have my degree in fisheries biology. And hopefully in the fall, I'll be moving to Virginia at the College of William and Mary. Before I introduce you to our very special guest, please participate in this broadcast by typing your questions at the Awesome Osprey Project chat. If you're on the website and are having difficulty, the folks there will guide you to the right location. We want your questions for the Q&A section. Today, we have a world-renowned lead authority and top osprey scientist who has been studying ospreys since 1971. When I first met him last year at the annual Raptor Research Conference, I was giving my osprey presentation. And when I saw him in the crowd, I said, oh my gosh, there's an osprey god in the audience. And for a millisecond, I forgot how to speak. Thank goodness I was able to recover and deliver a great speech. A very, very warm welcome to you, Dr. Rob Bierregaard, also known as Dr. B. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your book, Belle's Journey.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we proceed, just to highlight a couple of accolades, Belle's Journey received one of 2 honorable mentions in the 2018 National Outdoor Book Children's Division and placed on the National Science Teachers Association list of outstanding trade books for 2019. Outstanding indeed. So Dr. B, a friend suggested that you write a book about your favorite osprey, and in only 5 months you produced this book. Now that's inspired action. Please tell us about Belle and your book.
Well, 5 months to get the book written and then 5 years to get it published. So it was quite a process. So I'm going to run through some slides on my PowerPoint presentation, and that will explain to people what I've been doing with the satellite telemetry, and give you highlight a few of the basic things we've learned about osprey migration, and then I'll segue into writing the book, which was something that I had never thought about doing until one day someone said you should write a book. So let me switch over now. And I've got a sort of a longer presentation, so I'm going to I'll sort of scroll quickly through some slides and get to the meat of the matter. So
yeah, absolutely.
Share screen, share this one. Okay, we good?
We're good.
Okay. So the talk is, I titled it Journeys. I talk about both the journeys that ospreys take as they migrate, anywhere from 1,000 miles to 5,000 miles back and forth every year, mostly from North America to South America, for the birds all the birds I've studied. And then I've also sort of thrown in as a little bit of a theme to the organizing concept, the journey that the technology has taken. So when I've been tagging I tagged ospreys for 18 years, from 2000 to 2017, and I tagged 108 birds. 61 of them were juveniles, and so in the course of those 18 years, the technology of the transmitters changed a lot, and each time the technology got better, it enabled us to learn more things about osprey migration, not only osprey migration, but about their aspects of their natural history around the nest. So let's see if this works. This is just a funny slide that I always include. I'm sure everybody here knows what an osprey is. And this was a photoshopped picture that I found on the net somewhere and I stole. Once upon a time, ospreys nested in trees. Right now, almost every osprey nest we look at is on a platform. But this was sort of an old school nest. And now they nest everywhere, any place, and they love being out on the water. This is a funny one. This is a statue up near Cape Cod that ospreys have sort of created a crown of thorns for the statue. Ospreys, you almost always lay 3 eggs, and they can, this is one clutch, so these are 3 eggs laid by the same female and quite different in coloration. Obviously they eat nothing but fish. This is a female osprey. You can see the dark chest band on her, and she is going for gold. She's caught 2 menhaden there. I've seen one little video clip of an osprey that catches, I think, 7 fish in one dive. Wow. Small fish, but not sure what this bird's going to do when it has to land with those 2 fish. Family life, again, almost always 3 eggs. Rarely do all 3 young survive, but here's the male coming in with a fish. He's eating the head. That's his overhead charge that he takes. Female in the nest, you can see the difference in the plumage. The young birds have that sort of scalloping on their wings and back, and they've also got bright orange eyes. Adults are all sort of solid chocolate brown on the back, but you all know that, and you'll see that as the season progresses and we see young growing up on the different nests. So there and back again, I borrowed from Tolkien. That's the subtitle of The Hobbit. So here I am releasing a young osprey up on Cape Cod. The technology is there are a series of satellites that are orbiting the world in circumpolar orbit, and there are 6 or 7 of them, and they just pick up signals coming in from all sorts of different transmitters and send those back to receiving stations and then to the users. How we get the transmitters on the birds, I trap birds at the nest with a noose carpet, and I put when we're catching young birds, I put fish in the nest. The young birds are flying around for 2 or 3 weeks while they learn how to hunt. The adults do not teach the young how to hunt. I hear that all the time, but they don't. The adults just provide food. They sort of keep the young birds on an allowance. Females usually take off in the middle of August, so the last 3 or 4 weeks, Dad is in charge of keeping the fridge full. And so what I do is go up to a nest and put fish down on the nest and cover it with a little carpet of basically chicken wire covered with slip knots, and the birds get their talons tangled up in the little slip knots, and then I go up. If there are 2 birds caught at the same time, it's pretty chaotic. I go up and throw a hood on the birds, and that calms them right down. Then we take them down, put a transmitter on them. We use a Teflon ribbon, which is very smooth, doesn't irritate the birds. And this is a little template I have to hold the straps in place while I stitch them together. That all gets cut away. And then the bird wears the transmitter like a little backpack. The solar panel, so the current generation of transmitters, ever since I've been doing this, the transmitters have had solar batteries, and the very first transmitters didn't. They basically had a 1-year lifespan. And then we release the birds and off they go into the unknown, which is I always get a thrill when I do that. Lots of questions we can ask and answer about migration and what goes on in the wintering grounds. I won't belabor all that. So the first generation of transmitters, again, had just batteries, and they didn't have GPS, so we didn't have very accurate locations on where the birds were, to within 100 meters or maybe within a kilometer, which is fine when you want to know about migration. You know when birds leave, you know what route they take, you know how long they stop over on the way, but you can't really tell anything about where they're actually hunting, because you just don't have that level of accuracy. But it does tell us the migration routes, and these are the routes of most of the birds that have been tagged on the East Coast. You can see they all go down to Florida, Cuba, then Hispaniola down into South America. Midwest birds, some of them join the East Coast birds going into the Florida-Cuba trip. Some go across the Gulf, some go through Texas. And the Pacific Northwest birds mostly stop in Mexico and Central America. Very few of them go into South America. Males and females go to different places, and this is pretty obvious. This is a pair that I tagged in Martha's Vineyard. It's obvious they don't go to the same place because the males leave before the females, and so there's no way they could wind up in the same place. Some people think that that's why they can mate for life, is they spend winters in different places. So here's a male and female in Panama, and the male at the mouth of the Orinoco River. I'm going to skip that. So next generation of transmitters, we got solar power in them so that they last for years. The longest I had a bird wearing a transmitter was actually Belle, who wore her transmitter from 2010 to 2017. Actually, she's still wearing it. We have pictures of her taken this year, but the transmitter failed in 2017. So we got 7 years of data from Belle. She's probably I think she's the most, well, it also, skipping ahead here, it turns out that Belle should have been called Beau. Belle is a male. We blew it when we tagged the bird and decided it was a female, so we named him Belle. And so I find myself saying what she did when it should be what she did. Anyway, so with the transmitters that last for more than 1 year, we can see that individual birds take very different routes when they go south in the fall. So here's the same bird in 2 years. And here's the same bird in those same 2 years. In 1 year, 2010, he landed in Venezuela. And then in 2011, he landed after crossing the Caribbean in Colombia, about 450 miles west of where he landed the year before, but he still made it back to the exact same place. And one of the things we've learned from transmitters that last for more than a year is that these birds are as faithful to their wintering locations as they are to their breeding grounds. So they go back and forth from the same nest to basically the same tree down somewhere in South America. So here's that same bird, 6 different migrations. He's the second longest bird we had wearing his transmitter. And so you see that they get funneled through Cuba, so they all go pretty much the same way there, but sometimes they go through the Bahamas, where they take off from Haiti or the Dominican Republic differs from year to year, but they all wind up in exactly the same place. So that is, unless they don't. So here's a bird this is the last bird we had wearing a transmitter. This was Holly, who nests in the Chesapeake. And in 2017 and 16, she spent her winters in far eastern Brazil. This is the farthest east of any bird that's ever been followed with satellites. And in 2018, she short-stopped and didn't quite make it that far. So then we get GPS, and once we have GPS, then we can really the accuracy is about 15 meters. So we can really zoom in and find out what kind of tree the birds are sitting in. So this is what I'm going to focus on. So these are the adult roots in the fall, and these are the juveniles. And I can just sit and do this all day because it's so interesting. I could probably give a whole lecture just on these 2 slides. So a big thing to notice here, of course, is that the young birds are going. Those are all those tracks out over the Atlantic are young birds from Martha's Vineyard, and no adult does that. So what it turns out is that the young birds have a very simple program in their mind, which says, in the fall, go south and stay over land if at all possible. If you can't stay over land, then go ahead and go south and you'll eventually get to land. So that's what they do. Skip that. Here's the spring paths. Again, these are the adults. You notice that they, ironically, for a bird that eats nothing but fish, they don't like to fly over the water, so they stay over land as long as they can. And so these are the adults going north, and here are the juveniles. So notice that some of these juveniles were birds that had flown south over the Atlantic, and once they get to the Bahamas or Haiti, instead of following their tracks, their wing beats, if you will, back over the Atlantic, they just stay over land. So in the spring, and they don't come back until they're almost 2 years old, so they have an extra year down south. So you notice that these birds don't go back over the Atlantic, but they stay over land. And here's Belle, the heroine of our story. So that's his first migration south. The yellow is his first migration north in 2012. Again, he went up through the Bahamas. Next year, when he went south in the fall of 2012, he did not go back over the Atlantic. He went over a bit of the Atlantic, but at least he knew better than just to head south from Martha's Vineyard. Going north about the same route. Here he is in the third migration cycle, and here's the fourth migration cycle. So we see that after 4 migration cycles, Belle has figured out the adult route, and all of his subsequent migrations looked exactly like that. So that was really cool to discover that. So the fourth generation, we have solar power, we've got GPS, so we have this 15-meter accuracy, and we have cell tower downloads. So the satellites are flying 540 miles up in the sky, and the transmitters that the birds carry only weigh less than an ounce. So pretty amazing that that little radio can send a signal 540 miles. But it can't send, it costs a lot of energy to send that signal. So we only can get with the old satellite transmitters hourly locations. But with the satellite, with the cell tower downloads, we can get locations sometimes every 2 minutes. So we can see some remarkable detail in what the birds are doing. So on the left, on the right is the GPS without the satellite. That's the satellite. GSM are the cell towers. So you'll notice that the birds are flying in what appears to be very straight lines, and the little colored balloons there are hourly locations. So some people don't like to connect the hourly dots with a line, because they think that's it's falsely implying that the bird flew in exactly that same path. But I sort of warn everybody that no, they didn't fly in exactly that path, but that's a way to keep track of which locations, how the bird was moving through space and time. So over on the left, you see those little squiggly lines, and those are cell tower birds. So those birds are we're getting signals every couple of minutes. And so what's going on with all that jiggly lines? Well, this is interesting. Here's a cell tower bird, but I've taken just the locations from once an hour for a 5-hour period and connected them with a straight line. And that's what the bird actually did. So what they're doing there is they're going off looking for thermals. And the amazing thing is that the bird, just even though he's wandering, he still seems to wander back, so that the overall path he's taking is in a pretty much of a straight line for that period of time. So here's a bird that we can actually see it go up in a thermal. This is really cool. So you can see the bird's gliding down at 11:42. He is 1,253 feet. 5 minutes later, he has climbed, circling in a thermal up 2,110 feet, and then he glides on down to look for the next thermal. So ospreys and any large soaring bird in fall migration, in any migration, can go a long way without even flapping their wings. I'm just using these rising columns of hot air. We can also actually see when a bird stops to fish. So here's a bird who's come along through the Guyana in northern South America, and he gets to the water. He sort of zigs and zags out over the water, and then all of a sudden he flies straight back to the beach, stops for 45 minutes, which is about how long it takes an osprey to eat a fish. Then he goes out over the water. He probably flew along and dipped his feet in the water. They like to do that after they've caught a fish, and then he goes on migrating. So here I am sitting in my office and looking at my computer, and I can tell just when and where one of my ospreys caught a fish in South America, which is pretty amazing. Here's another bird who's fishing, traveling along, and he gets to a river and starts circling around. And then that little concentration of points over on the left is, again, where he stopped to eat his fish. We can see how long, when we're using the cell tower data, we can actually see how long they go without feeding. And they can go easily 4 or 5 days. And when they're migrating, especially migrating north, they're in a bit more of a hurry. So they will often pass up opportunities to feed. You'll see them fly over reservoirs, fly over lakes, and they don't, or rivers, and they don't stop to feed. So Belle's journey, and this is my journey, personal journey as an author, a first-time author. I was a falconer. I guess you're always, once a falconer, always a falconer. So I used to, this is Gandalf, my first red-tailed hawk. And I flew a number of peregrine falcons and prairie falcons and kestrels, and really have been deeply and passionately involved with birds of prey since my high school days. So back in 2013, Bill Bryan over on the left there said, you should write a book. And he asked me if I knew the book Paddle to the Sea, which is a very famous kids book. And it was, the format was a chapter on one page, a colored illustration on the other. And this is a story about an Indian boy who carves a wooden canoe and leaves it on a snowdrift in north of the Great Lakes. And the canoe, you follow the canoe as it flows through the Great Lakes and over Niagara Falls. And so this, Bill said, that'd be a great way to present your osprey migration story. So I said, well, I'll give it a try. And so I got home and sat down to put together a little storyboard. And so Belle was the most interesting osprey we followed, because we followed them for so long. And Belle was one of the first to go out, or went the farthest out over the Atlantic. So that was pretty exciting. But other than that, the rest of Belle's travels were pretty boring. So I decided to sort of splice in the stories that other birds had done. So I didn't mention this, but when you saw the slide of all the young birds, there's a track that goes out into the Atlantic. Well, this was a bird who landed on a ship, got stuck in some bad weather, landed on a ship, and never got off the ship. So and quite a few of our birds do stop to rest on ships. So I have Belle land on a ship. Belle had an easy sail across the Caribbean, but some birds fly into hurricanes. We have a lot of mortality. In fact, where we've lost most of our birds is crossing the Caribbean in the fall, which is hurricane season. So this is a bird that's getting blown around by a hurricane that turned what should have been a 600-mile trip from Cuba to Colombia into a 1,000-mile trip. So I have Belle do that. That's the weather that bird flew through. And then Belle's trip north was pretty boring. So one of the birds that we had who actually wintered in Cuba missed the turn to Florida and wound up going all the way across the Gulf of Mexico. And so I have Belle do that. So Belle turns out to be the storybook. Belle is the composite of 4 different ospreys. But everything that happens to Belle in the story happened to one of my ospreys. So decided it's a kid's book, so we need some kids in the story. And this is actually Belle. This isn't Belle, but that's Belle's nest. If you can see just in the middle of the slide, breaking the tree line. And whenever we tagged birds at this nest, a whole bunch of kids would hang out with us. So I sort of used the kids originally to just ask us some questions while we're tagging the bird. And then the kids became more and more important in the story, and they help us out with following the ospreys and learn a lot about ospreys in the process. So I wrote the book. Well, now what? I Googled what to do with how to publish a children's book. And I think I got 2,500,000 hits, which wasn't particularly useful. But notice that one of those is The Complete Idiot's Guide to Publishing Children's Books there. So I had no illustrator, all I had was a book and no idea what to do next. So I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a gal. And so the gal on the right is Kate Garchinsky, who wound up illustrating the book. And I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a gal. And the guy at the end of this story is the guy who wrote The Complete Idiot's Guide to Publishing Children's Books. And so this is Harold Underdown, and he, so I sent him the book, and he liked it, and became our agent and helped us sell the book to Charles Bridge Publishers. So we put together a sort of a prospectus. Kate did a bunch of illustrations. The one on the left here of the bird growing, osprey growing up, didn't wind up in the book, but Kate and I are particularly fond of the second illustration coming down on the left there, where the baby osprey looks like E.T. So I found an author, an artist, I found a publisher, and then the work began revising the text. And there's a few of the versions of the text going through the process. And as I mentioned earlier, it took 5 years to publish this. About 2 of those were sort of fumbling around trying to find a publisher. Once we did that, it still took 3 years. And the reason it takes 3 years is that once you get the text, you go back and forth with your editor, get the text just right, then the whole process begins again with the illustrations. So the book goes to the art department, and they set a layout, send it to the artist, and the artist does sketches, and you back and forth with the artist in the art department. So eventually, these are some of the chapter illustrations. This is Belle just before they are going south on their first migration. This is Belle's trip down, or where Belle spends his winters on a big reservoir at the southern edge of the Amazon. The 2 kids are all excited about ospreys, and the first year when Belle is still doing his gap year in South America, we run into the kids again. They help us out checking a few nests. And then in the end, Belle comes home and builds a nest. And my good friend Dick, who's the 4th character in the story, takes the kids out to see Belle at her nest. And so the journey is complete after 5 years, and it's been doing quite well. We had a very fun summer, sort of doing the book tour. I had a little T-shirt made that like a rock tour with all of the book signing events. So the book's available directly from me if anyone wants an autographed copy. When you can get back into your local bookstore, it's best to buy it there. You can buy it on Amazon, but better to buy it from an independent bookstore if you can. And I think, so 8 years later, actually 10 years later, so this was a 2018 picture. Here's Belle, and we're still wearing the transmitter. And we didn't get any pictures in 2019, but I don't think I have it here. This year, Belle was photographed 3 times in about a 5-week period, once in Connecticut and twice on Cape Cod. And the last time Belle was photographed, he was seen carrying a fish from the pond where he caught it off toward the horizon. And that means that Belle has a nest. If Belle wasn't mated, he wouldn't carry the fish off toward the horizon. We don't know where the nest is, but we know it's out there. So that's pretty good, time-wise.
Perfect timing.
Good. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it and happy to answer questions as they come in, if they come in.
That's a great story. Congratulations, Dr. B. Bravo, bravo. We do have a couple questions from the Q&A section. I also have some questions as well. Earlier you said that an osprey caught 7 fish in one dive. How do they do that?
They were small, so there was a big school of fish. They were in very shallow water, and they were each probably about, 6 inches long maybe. So the osprey just went in and just grabbed this massive fish and came up with about 7 of them.
So it just raked right through and brought them all up. That's a very smart bird.
Well, again, I'm not sure what if he could get to a nest, he could maybe land in the nest, but he couldn't land on a tree and perch with.
Right.
Well, he could go land on the ground, I guess. Anyway.
We have another question, especially with migration. Why do males and females go to different places?
Basically because typically males go, oh, this is hard to sort out statistically, but it looks like the males don't go as far south as females. And we know this is true for some songbirds. And it's because the males want to get back to the nest first, because they claim the territories. So if you don't go as far south, that means that you can get back to the nest quicker in the spring. Females don't care, so they go a little bit further south. This is true. I know this is true of juncos and a number of species. So they don't go to the same place specifically because they leave at separate times, so they couldn't get to the same. They don't travel together. So a number of species of birds migrate in family groups, like whooping cranes and waterfowl. Some gulls and terns migrate as family units, so they can go to the same place because they're traveling together. Birds that don't travel together can't go to the exact same place. So that's one reason. And then the sort of second level why they don't go to the same place is that males want to be able to get home sooner, and the females go a little bit further south, maybe to avoid competition with the males, or maybe just because they can. They're not in as big a rush.
I see. So in chapter 1, the setting is in late March on Martha's Vineyard at Lake Kashmu, and Osprey is performing his sky dance as a courtship ritual to attract a mate. How long does courtship usually last, and what does a male osprey do during this dance?
So he will catch a fish, and then he'll go up and fly high up over the nest, 200 or 300 feet over the nest, and call. He gives a characteristic, very loud call, and he hovers. So they're basically showing off what a good fisher person they are.
And they are.
Yeah. So they'll hover, and then they'll go into a big dive, and then go up and hover and go into a dive. And they'll do that. It's not there's not sort of an on-off switch, so it's not as like as soon as they're done mating and eggs are laid, they stop doing courtship diving. They'll still do that, and then you'll see occasionally birds doing it all through the summer. And they don't always do it with fish. I had one bird where I was trying to trap adult male at a nest, and we set our trap. We caught the female, and we had a hood on her, and I was holding her in my lap, and she actually fell asleep while I was holding her. And we were trying to get the male to come in to the trap, but he wouldn't come in. He had a big bunch of seaweed in his talons that he was going to bring in to trim the nest. So he couldn't land on the trap, and so all of a sudden he went up and he started sky dancing with his seaweed. So the joke, of course, is that here he was, his female had been gone for 20 minutes, and he's already courting and trying to lure in a new female. And I always joke that he was lucky the female had her hood on and didn't see that he was already courting after 30 minutes, where he didn't know where she was. He was already doing courtship.
Oh gosh, that's so funny. And with seaweed too. Dr. B, in chapter 6, we can see how the transmitter fits on Belle. And when selecting the transmitter, what factors must be considered?
There's a rule of thumb that you don't want any transmitter you put on a bird to be more than 3% of the bird's body weight. So that's sort of the industry standard. And then that's really the decision. Well, then there are different companies that, in terms of reliability, but they all are basically the same backpack mount.
Right. We've seen so many advances with technology. Do you think that transmitters will evolve, and what kind of improvements would you like to see with these transmitters?
Oh, they're amazing now.
They are.
So they keep getting smaller and smaller. There are transmitters that can the way that are down to 3 grams.
Wow.
And now those, of course, don't have a battery, a solar battery, and they can't do GPS, but they can give you can at least follow your bird and get a pretty decent idea of where it is and the timing of its travel. But they've got accelerometers in the transmitters, so you can tell if a bird's moving or not, and so you can get really detailed information about flight behavior. There's some that can give you physiological data from the bird. It's just amazing. I'd love to keep on doing this forever, but with every time there's a new technology, I'm lured into. I want to do it some more. But
well, more research need. There's so many questions that we need to answer. Like even just their foraging ecology with transmitters is needed.
Yeah, so that we've got good data on that. So because I tagged a fair number of adult males, and so we know how far they're going to hunt, and for the few birds that I tagged. But the thing that right now the biggest gap in our knowledge of osprey biology is how the young work their way into the breeding population. So we know that they don't come back. They have that extra year down in wherever they're wintering, South America, or for the most part. And that's always been a mystery. There aren't many birds that do that. Some large, there's some large raptors and some gulls, I think, do it too. Some large birds in Europe do it, have a gap year down south. When I first started doing this, I thought, well, maybe it's because that gives the young birds, time to sort of shop the real estate market and find a really good place to spend their winters. That would make sense, because we knew that the adults go back to the same spot every year. So how do they find that great spot? Does it take an extra year wandering around? It turns out that's not the case, because all of the young who settled down had done so within a couple of months, 3 or 4 at the most. So almost all of that time they spend in that gap year is spent just in the same spot. And it's just because they're not going to breed till they're 2 or 3 anyway. So risking that migration, it's just too dangerous. So they spend the extra year, but when they do come back and they start, and they don't go back to the exact same place, rarely do they go back to their nest. Lots of people in the chat groups I followed think that every time an osprey comes near a nest, it must have been a young from the year before. I hear that, or 2 years before. I hear that all the time, and it's just not true. They tend to disperse. Males tend to nest closer to within 10 or 15 miles of where they were born, and females wander more. So in fact, we had one of our birds from Martha's Vineyard made it all the way to Lake Superior on her first fall as she was wandering around. And my friend Alan Poole, who just wrote the fabulous book on ospreys, he just heard that one of the young osprey he tagged on the southeast coast of Massachusetts is now breeding in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
So, which is what my bird that went that far could have done if she hadn't been shot in Haiti that winter.
Oh.
And there's a Roy Dennis over in Scotland had a bird that nested 1,200 kilometers or so from its nest. But as a rule, they come back to the same spot, same general area. And it turns out that what I've seen in the few birds that have made it through a couple of years with the transmitter is that they really do their prospecting in late summer, July and August. That's when they tend to they'll focus in at an area. I saw this the first time with one bird, and I wasn't really paying attention, but I noticed that it spent a lot of its time on one marsh in Long Island. And then the next spring it came back and it went back to that same marsh. And I looked with on Google Earth, and I zoomed in, and I could actually see the shadow of a nest pole, so I knew that the bird was on a nest. And so I got in touch with some of the people that were following my ospreys up there, and they went out and looked, and they saw, yeah, he's there, but he got chased away by the previous owner came back and ran him out of town. But he did the same thing the next year, where he sort of all of his locations in July and August were concentrated in one place, and then the next spring, that was where he nested. But so if I had time and unlimited time and money, what I would do now is go down to Venezuela someplace. Well, maybe not Venezuela. Go someplace in South America and tag a bunch of young ospreys in July, because those would be birds that had come down the fall before and they were in their gap year. Right? Because the only birds in South America in July are the young birds from last fall. And so at that point, they've made it through the southbound migration. They've gotten through the most dangerous part of the life cycle. And from then on, it's going to be, their mortality rate is about the same as adults. So if you tagged a bunch of birds down there, you'd have a good chance of getting more data on them, sort of what's the process, where they get, how do they find a nest, how far do they go to find a nest, how long does it take them. Belle was probably 7 or 8 years before he found a nest, maybe even 10. And that's not unheard of. With the osprey population being so dense, there aren't many opportunities for breeding. So young birds have to wait for a vacancy where an old bird dies.
That sounds like a great research project that I would love to get involved with that. We do have some more questions from the chat. How do you choose what birds to tag, or is it just ease of access to the nest?
Pretty much. Yes. So it's got to be a nest I can get to. And as we were progressing through the whole study, at one point I wasn't going to do any, after I did about 6 or 7 birds, I wasn't going to do any more because we were getting the same old data, and 100 birds had already been tagged by other people. But with each new generation of the technology, that gave me, that opened up new questions to ask. So when we got the GPS, well, first I shifted to juveniles because I knew they were that was feasible to do them, and very few people had tagged juveniles. So I got going on that, and then the GPS functionality was incorporated in the transmitter. So that meant that we could tag adult males and follow them to see how far they were going to forage. We didn't tag any adult females because hardly any adult females because that's boring. They just sit on the nest and you don't really learn anything by putting a transmitter on an adult female. So that was sort of, I shifted completely to juveniles. Then once the new technology came in with the GPS, then I went back to adults. And it was originally where people would sponsor transmitters. So people would call me up or email me and say, hey, I want to put transmitters on birds here. So Delaware State Parks got in touch with me, so I tagged 6 or 7 birds there. Then Ian McLeod from New Hampshire got in touch with me, and so we did a bunch of birds inland. So once we found a funder that would underwrite the work, then it's a question of just nest that you can get to.
Mm-hmm. A couple more questions, Dr. B. Do both males and females have that gap year?
Yes, there's hardly. There are a couple of records of ospreys returning in their first spring. So they go down in the fall, and there's a record from Europe and 1 or 2 from North America, but everything else, every other bird that's been followed has done the gap year.
A final question, Dr. B. In chapter 13 of the book, on page 69, Belle seized an opportunity at a fish farm and was shot at. Aquaculture, especially in developing countries, is seen as a viable method to ensure food security. However, wildlife laws are not as stringent as they are here, and aqua farms shoot ospreys to protect their product. Do you think this is one of the biggest threats towards ospreys? And do you think there is a research need in order to quantify that?
It's a threat. It's not the biggest threat.
Mm,
The well, it's the biggest that the research has been done in Colombia. There's a fair amount of research that's been done, and the fish farmers don't just shoot ospreys; they shoot lots of other birds that come into their fish ponds. We've lost 6 or 7 ospreys probably to shooting. Sometimes it's just hunters, but more often than not, it's probably fish farms. And so, yes, there has been some research done on that, and there are people who are working with, trying to work with aquaculture to set up ways that they can protect their fish without having to shoot birds.
great. Well, Dr. B, thank you so much for being here today. It's been such a pleasure, very enlightening presentation, and I'm definitely going to review it and study it. And for those of you, this is my copy here. I love it. I turn each page. I'm very fascinated with the illustrations. What I love about this book is that it's so accessible. It's friendly. You introduce some pretty complex ideas in this book, but with the illustrations and the story being told, the characters, it's a wonderful book. So I highly recommend it. It's not just for kids. I read it. It's great.
Yeah,
So yes, order it through Dr. B if you want it to be autographed, and also again support your local bookstores. Go ahead, Dr. B. Final word.
So I was just going to say that I got a really nice email from someone who got the book for their 69th birthday present. So.
Nice. See, exactly, all ages.
It's 8 to 108. I used to say 8 to 80. An 84-year-old friend of mine said, "What do you mean? I can't read it?" So 8 to 108 is the target audience.
Oh, I like that.
So thank you for having me talk to your group, and congratulations with your project. I think these nest cams really offer we've learned a lot from nest cams. So I wrote or co-authored the Birds of North America account for ospreys, and there are probably 5 or 6 things in that account that we discovered from people watching nest cams, things that we didn't know. We didn't know when eggs hatch. So I've worked very closely with the Hog Island group, and I said, well, when do eggs hatch? And they could tell me the the minute that every egg had hatched, and
exactly.
That's one thing we've learned. We watched young trimming the nest. That's always they do that a fair bit. Oops. And this is what a great ending. This is Dick Jennings from the book calling me now. Hang on.
Thank you, Dr. B.
All right. So
thank you so much.
Congratulations with your work, and good luck with it. And I look forward to hearing more from you.
I'll keep you posted. Thank you so much.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.